What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously, both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. Guys, real quick before we begin, just want to ask you a quick favor. If you can, please stop what you're doing and leave a review for the podcast. Whatever platform you're listening in on, if you can give us a 5-star or whatever the highest rating is, it would be fantastic. And even better, if you found it useful in any way, please write that down on a very brief review if that's possible. It makes such a difference to how the podcast is received out there and pushed out on various platforms. That's all, nothing else to ask. Now let's get on with the show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And if it's been a while since you heard from me, it is because you're listening only to Behind the Facade, the podcast here. I'm actually quite active over on YouTube lately, and my personal channel, Gavin J. Gallagher, has been getting a lot of traction. And so I've been putting a bit of focus into that. But I wanted to come back here today to the original roots of my audience with you guys. And I wanted to tell you about all of the news that is going on in the Irish property market. There's a huge amount of news. And what I've done is I've collated the last 2 weeks of news to just bring you all of the stories that I see and how they're impacting the market. Before I do that, I thought what I'll do quickly make an announcement. I have a coaching workshop coming up on Tuesday, the 16th of June. So it's at 6 p.m. in the evening. I'm calling it your mid-year investment audit. And it is really going to be kind of a strategic review of your investment plans and how to smash the second half. It's kind of hard to believe that we're already halfway through the year. This is a news roundup of all the property related news for the week ending 12th of June. And I guess before I get into the property related stuff, I have to tell you about the big international story that is on all the newspapers at the moment. And that is the IPO of SpaceX. And Elon Musk, not that he was rich before, but he has just become even richer. He is now officially the world's first trillionaire, which is incredible to think about as a number. Two things come to mind when I think about that. First of all, it does make me nervous about the state of the market. If you read the various reports about the valuation of the company and stuff like that, it seems like it's been overvalued, and there's a kind of a view out there that things are getting into kind of bubble territory in the whole AI area. And so I'm just thinking that it feels a little bit like right now, this time that we're in, if I rewind back the clock, I think about 1999 and the dot-com crash. And it does feel like we're kind of on that verge of something like that happening, just with all of this valuations and the AI bubble that everyone's talking about, and data centers and the cost of implementation of all that kind of stuff. And I just think when you combine all of that with the impact of the war in Iran and the pushing up of prices and everything, that I think we're just on the verge of this kind of economic downturn. It's just a gut feeling. I don't really have any more knowledge than anybody else, but it just feels to me like that there's a ticking time bomb, and it will go off at some stage in the near future. Who knows when? But I do think that the seeds of that are there. So anyway, we'll keep going. One of the things that I just mentioned, a trillionaire, and the second thing that came to mind when I read that, report about Elon Musk being a trillionaire, is that I don't think people comprehend just how big of a number that is. It's when you're using US dollars or euro or any of that stuff, it's a unit of measure that kind of loses its relevance. Okay, if you have $1 million in your bank, you're doing pretty well. If you have 10 million in your bank, you're doing really well, and so on and up it goes. But to get to $1 trillion, it kind of loses its impact, because it's hard to put into and it's hard to kind of imagine what that looks like. All right. And so what I thought I'll do is measure it as a piece of time, okay? And this is a little exercise. Bear with me for this now because it's kind of interesting. If you think about €1 million in your bank, you kind of think, whoa, nice to have. I'd love to have €1 million sitting in my bank. It's a good sum of money. And then if you think about the Euro Millions jackpot that was won in Belgium last week, that was 175 million. So absolutely staggering amount of money for one person to win, some lucky guy in Belgium. And those two amounts, like 175 million, it's a much bigger figure. But if you actually change that unit of measurement into seconds, so on your clock, on your watch, there are so many seconds in a day. And if you took 1 million seconds, that equates to 11.6 days. Just 11.6 days. That's 1 million seconds. So we go through 1 million seconds every 11.6 days. Now, to put in context the Euro Millions win of 175 million, that's actually 5.5 years in time terms. So somebody that has that, if you were spending a euro or a dollar every single second, it would take you 5 years to spend 175 million seconds. Now, if we jump to 1 billion seconds, it's like we're onto a whole different thing. That equates to 31 years, 31.7 years to be precise. So 11.6 days, that is 1 million seconds. 31.7 years, that is 1 billion seconds. So it's like half a lifetime, we'll say. So it's a massive, massive difference. Now, let's go and have a look at what 1 trillion seconds is. That's where you need to sit down here. 1 trillion seconds is the same as having 31,709 years. That is basically taking us back into the middle of the last ice age. So 11 days versus 31 years versus 31,700 years. And that gives you an idea of the amount of wealth that Elon Musk has compared to the average person. 5 years, if you have that 175 million win on the lotto, versus 31,700 years. So absolutely staggering. Anyway, let's get into the Irish property news. Sherry Fitzgerald, the big estate agency, they have published some findings this week, and they say that only 1 in 3 new homes that is being built is actually being placed on the market for sale. Close to half of all purchases now are being made by investment funds, charities and councils. When I say charities, I mean the approved housing bodies. And whilst we have to kind of acknowledge, I guess, the fact that house completions, there is a rise in house completions. So we were doing 20,000 a year, now we're doing 36,000 a year in the past 6 years. But part of the problem with this housing supply is the fact that we have got all these houses being built and only a third of them coming on the market. So there's this continued perception that we are in a housing crisis and that things are really bad, like there's a huge shortage of houses. Now, of course, the fact that the houses are being bought up by local authorities and stuff like that, I guess you can't completely sort of complain about that insofar as they are ending up in the hands of families that are on housing lists and things like that. But it does mean that home ownership rates have declined in the last number of years. So if you go back to 2011, 70% of all people in the country owned a house. Now it is just down to 66% of the population. That was by 2022. And now what we could do is we could question whether that is related to, let's say, a shift in demographics and the fact that young people, they don't necessarily want to buy a place straight away. Or you could put it down to this cultural shift because we now have a lot more migrants living in the country, and maybe the Irish sort of psyche is around owning a home. But the people that are coming in here, perhaps they're not so interested in owning a home because they can rent. However, what the Sherry Fitzgerald analysis shows us is that it's much more of a shift to institutional interest in institutional buying behavior. So between 2014 and 2019, a total of 57% of all homes were being bought by private individuals. However, today that figure is just 33%. So massive shift there in the period from 2020 to 2025. Now, because we're building less, if you go back to 2014 or whatever, we were actually only building about 20,000 houses a year. So that 57% represented about 11,000 houses a year. And today we're doing this higher capacity of 36,000. But 33% of that only equates to about 12,000. So we actually have barely changed in any way in the last decade or so. And so it's kind of no wonder this housing crisis is persisting. And it's hard to believe that we did 85,000 houses a year way back in 2007. And here we are like nearly 20 years on, and we're only able to do kind of 36,000. Now, apparently 2023 was the lowest year in the last 15 years of new bills sold on the open market. The number was only 29%. So in an entire year, all of the houses that were sold, only 29% ended up sold on the market. And so that is a problem. Although I guess what you could say on the other side is that the other percentage of the larger percentage, the 70%, 71%, that has gone to councils that are selling to social and affordable, that are giving their houses to social and affordable people on their lists. Now, interestingly, about 20% of all homes built in the country are one-offs. So I found that kind of an interesting figure because I wouldn't have thought so many people were doing one-offs. Another thing to bear in mind is that with so many people scrambling to get on the housing ladder, it's no wonder that we have such pressure. If we're only at about 12,000 houses a year actually ending up in the hands of people that are trying to buy them, then it's this domino effect is what's happening here, is that prices are being pushed up because of the pressure. You've got a lot more people than 12,000 trying to buy a home every year. And yet there's only 12,000 coming onto the market. And so what that's done is it's putting huge pressure on prices. The prices are meaning people are having to go further from where they work. The further away from work, the longer your commute. The longer your commute, the worse your health is because you're now spending more time in a car rather than walking or cycling. It also means that you've got an additional cost of living in that travel commute and stuff like that. It's all bad. Like, this is all pushing in a kind of a negative direction. Anyway, that's one of the news related to it. Okay, it's very relevant. Is a report by Goodbody stockbrokers, and they said that only 11%. There was a rise of 11% in the number of house completions in 2026. That's what we're expecting. And it's finally getting us to the magical figure of 40,000 housing units a year. Now, 40,000 housing units a year is better than 36, but it's still hard to believe. Like, we did 85,000 back in 2007. So I don't know. It's just, it's kind of amazing to think that we cannot get ourselves back to a level that we have achieved like 2 decades ago. And what the report noted was that the figures have slowed since the Iran war began, and that planning permissions need to pick up if we are to sustain the forward momentum that we had seen. According to the Central Statistics Office, there has been a 1% drop in the number of homes being approved for planning permission in the first quarter of 2026, that figure being 8,092 units. And the split of that was 61% houses, 39% apartments. Furthermore, related to that story is that the number of first-time buyers, the number of mortgages being issued is now at a 18-year high. The value of those mortgages is now notable insofar as it is the highest since the 2003. That was the last time that the figure hit that amount. And so this is obviously, we're back in the heady days of the Celtic Tiger. And the figure now for first-time buyers, the average cost of a house for a first-time buyer is $319,710. If we were to take the central bank's rules into account, this would suggest that first-time buyers' average income is now hovering just under 80,000. Now, obviously, that could be two incomes of 40,000 or one of 80 or a combination of those two. What's interesting is that mortgages for existing homeowners, so not the people buying the new homes, the first-time buyers, but the people buying existing homes, that mortgage figure is actually slightly higher at 379,000, so 60,000 more. And according to the report, 27,652 homes were bought last year in total. So about 11,500 of them are the new first-time homes that are being sold only in the market, and the other are being bought by the institutions and the local authorities and stuff. But a total of 27,000 homes were sold last year. Now, another detail worth noting is that Wicklow is the county with the most mortgages that have been drawn down in the past year or so. It's up 54%, so it's a big increase there in Wicklow. Limerick saw a growth of 20%, and then the west of the country is down an average of 31% over the last 5 years. Anyway, next story. With all the talk about mortgages, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is interest rate hikes. So this week, just yesterday, in fact, the ECB increased its rate for the first time since 2023. And this is primarily because of inflationary pressure caused by Trump's war on Iran. The rates rose 0.25% to 2.25%. And they also increased the main lending rate to 2.4%. And 2.4% is the rate that will be sort of pegged to those people on ECB tracker mortgages. Now, the ECB President Christine Lagarde said that this was not a signal that they had made some sort of policy decision to start raising interest rates now. However, most economists do expect at least one more rate rise in September. The principal driver of all of this is energy prices pushing up inflation. Now, the overall inflation figure in May came in at 3.2%, which is well above the target rate of 2% that they're trying to kind of keep it at. Most of this was driven by a surge of 10.9% in energy costs. So the average breaks back to 3.2. Now, if we look back over the past 5 years, it's kind of interesting to see how rates have changed. The lowest rate that we ever saw in the last number of years was June 2022, when the rates actually hit negative 0.5%. And then we obviously had this big jump in inflation, which was caused by the coming out of the pandemic, but also the war that Putin launched on Ukraine. And so that pushed interest rates up very quickly. And we hit 4% by September 15 months later, September 2023. And at the time that all of that was going on, Eurozone inflation hit 10.6%. So thankfully, we're still well off that at 3.2. But you've got a couple of different factors that are going to influence this. The economist Mark Wall, who works at Deutsche Bank, he has commented that, yes, there is inflationary pressure, that could push up rates, but we've also got to balance it with the fact that there is economic growth declines or falls that are also on the cards because of increased energy and commodity prices. So he believes that September's rate rise will be the only one and that there won't be further rises after that. Another story worth thinking about is, while rates increase and inflation is increasing, and these are all seen as a bad thing, one company that apparently is benefiting from all of this is Grafton Group, who announced that their annual earnings growth is expected to be growing at greater than 10% per year between now and 2030. Now, if you consider that Grafton Group is a builders, merchant and DIY company, they own Woody's DIY, they own Chadwick's. So we can obviously read into that the cost of building materials and all that are on the rise. And so you have to kind of question, is this all related to Iran, or is there an element of gouging going on by the suppliers of, I'm not specifically targeting Grafton here, I'm saying there's a general view that just everyone, prices are going up, and the prices might go up because of raw materials like related oil materials. If you think, for example, pipes that go into gutters and sewers and stuff like that, they're made with plastics. Plastics are a byproduct of oil and gas. And so you can see why there would be a push up and increase in prices. However, I'm hearing sort of anecdotal sort of stories from clients and stuff. They're saying that seems to be a bigger push than just inflation related stuff. I think there's a feeling that the suppliers are kind of gouging the building industry, and so be interesting to see what you think on that. Okay, and we have a couple of other stories that are worth getting into, and one of them is that the RTB chairman Owen Keegan has resigned from his role as chairman, and that is less than 2 years into a 5-year role. Now, the RTB, of course, is the Residential Tenancies Board, and that is the body that regulates the private rental market. And it comes just a few months after the introduction of this new 6-year mandatory tenancy law. Now, I have a lot of landlords inside of my group and my community, and pretty much everyone complains about the RTB. If you're a landlord, you will view the RTB as not the most effective organisation. And the primary reason behind that is that there's just very slow at dealing with any kind of dispute. So if you have a landlord and a tenant, if there's a dispute between them, a lot of the time it's around a tenant not paying rent, and the landlord wants to kind of have them removed, and the RTB takes a long time to sort of get involved in that case. And so a lot of the time these disputes, they drag out 12 to 18 months. What's really interesting is that like all of those complaints about that, and they're very justified in my view, it's just I don't think they have the funding or the staffing or whatever that they need in the organization. But what's interesting to see is like Owen Keegan is not the first person to have resigned from the role. In the past, since 2020, so in the past 6 years, a total of 5 individuals have held the role of RTB director or interim director with responsibility for day-to-day command of the organization. 5 different leaders in as many years, essentially. You would see that as some sort of a red flag as to why the organization is in the state that it's in. And is he leaving because it's unmanageable, or is it because the government policy is, there's always, he says that he's leaving for personal reasons, but you have to wonder if 5 people have left in so many years, there's something more to that story. Anyway, thought maybe let's finish on some good news, and that is there is agreement in principle at the top of government that the Rent a Room scheme, this is the tax scheme that you can earn up to $14,000 if you rent out a room, they are going to extend it to cover back garden cabins. Now, this is, it's not ready to sign before cabinet yet, but looks like it's coming soon. And there was speculation during the week that it was actually going to be signed this week. But the Rent a Room scheme, just to remind you guys, it allows you to rent out a room in your house and earn up to $14,000 a year tax free. And a lot of people in my group are doing that, taking advantage of that. But there's also this separate thing that's being talked about, and it's about bringing in garden cabins, and these are like modular cabins that can be lifted on a crane over your house or else assembled in the back garden, and as long as they're under 45 square meters, then they are exempt from planning permission. Now that hasn't come into power yet, but it's on the cards. And they're also talking about, I think, attic conversions being allowed as well. But this new talk about this is going to mean that you don't have to have somebody living in your house anymore. You can actually put them down in a cabin at the end of the garden. And I think a lot of people would open up their home to that possibility. Now, of course, opposition parties, it doesn't take long for them to kind of jump in and start kind of complaining about all of this. And so what they're terming this is as beds in sheds. Of course, there's always some sort of a naming. they love to name the stuff. Beds in sheds, and they say that in this situation, the tenant would have absolutely no rights because the rent-a-room scheme is separate to the landlord and tenant laws. And so they don't get registered in the RTB. The person is essentially living as a licensee as opposed to a lease. And so they're not signing a lease with you. They're basically a license. And so they don't fall under the RTB rules. And so, of course, the opposition parties are up in arms at this whole idea. But I don't think anyone is going to allow somebody to rent a unit in the back garden if they have some sort of 6-year right to that. Somebody might be doing this because they're facing like a financial crunch or something like that, and they just need to do it. Now, it's worth noting, and somebody commented on this the last time I mentioned this in one of my videos, is that the 14,000 tax-free figure, it's actually a little bit misleading because it operates on what's known as a cliff edge basis, okay? And it means that if you earn up to 14,000, it's tax-free. But if you earn 14,001 euro, you now lose every single bit of the exemption and you are fully taxable on the entire 14,001. Just €1 and it pushes you into fully taxable. So it kind of makes a joke about it. I feel like it should be like the first 14,000 is okay, and if you agree 15,000 you pay tax on the extra 1,000. But no, you would have to pay tax on every single penny. And so I can see that being something that would put off some people. Now, it's also worth noting, and this is an important one for those of you who pay attention to the detail, is that it is based on receipt of income, not profit. So you might collect 14,000 exactly from your tenant, but you might have bills. Like the fact that they're living in the house might have pushed up your bills by so much and all that. None of that is actually deductible. It's only the 14,000 on the button is the amount that you've been received from the tenant to your hand. And so 14K on the nose, or don't do it at all. All right, guys, that is the Irish property news for the week. And to summarize it again, we have Elon Musk now a trillionaire. Now that the only reason I mention it again is just because I think that the market is looking a bit shaky, and I wonder, is there going to be a crash of some sort in the near future? 1/3 of new homes are going on the market. 2/3 is being kept back. House completions are up 11%. The ECB has increased its rates, and it looks like September will be the next rate. Grafton Group are looking at a 10% per year increase in their earnings between now and 2030. The RTB chairman has resigned, and beds in sheds at 14K. Which story stood out the most for you? I would love to know. If you want to put a comment, if you're watching on a video here, put a comment down below. If you are listening on the podcast, maybe send me a message. Just love to know what you think is the story that stood out the most, and what do you think about the idea of there being some sort of a crash or something like that? I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I just feel like there's something in the air. And remember, guys, my workshop on the Tuesday, the 16th of June. If you're watching this after that date, there'll be another one. I do them every month, but you can register down below. And if you're coming along on Tuesday, I'll see you then. If not, I will catch you in the next one. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me. You will find me on social media. My handle is Gavin J. Gallagher. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the various projects I'm working on over on my website, gavinjgallagher.com. That's all for now. I will see you guys in the next episode.